Chapter 48. In front of the sacred white church, there was a lawn full of bright flowers, a priest presiding over the wedding and a bride and groom standing there. The man was wearing a white suit with a rose pinned to his chest, his hair neatly combed, his spirits high, his smile bright. The woman was wearing a long white wedding dress, a white veil covering her long black hair. She was holding the man's arm with a happy smile. Cheerful wedding music played as the priest performed the wedding for the two. You must confess your sins before God. The man and the woman began to confide their feelings to each other. The man said, "My name is Ikuta. Because I didn't have the consent of Tomoka's parents, I could only run away with her to this town to hold the wedding." The woman said, "My name is Tomoka. Even though I didn't have my parents' blessing, as long as I can be with Ikuta, I'm satisfied." The priest said, "No one can stop your love." Ikuta and Tomoka also looked at each other and smiled, their smiles filled with happiness. Siddle stood to the side, surrounded by many people attending the wedding. Everyone was excitedly cheering and blessing. Everything seemed very warm and wonderful. But among those blessings, a cold and spiteful voice of a little girl rang out, very harsh to the ears. "Don't marry him, don't marry him, don't marry him, don't marry him, don't marry him." Siddle lowered her head and saw a little girl around 7 or 8 years old who had appeared beside her at some point. The little girl kept mumbling to herself, her skin was pale white. Siddle felt a chill just standing next to her. Siddle didn't forget that this was a horror game. She quietly moved to the side. When she raised her head to look at the wedding, she suddenly discovered that the groom Ikuta didn't look very well. Ikuta's face was slightly wrinkled, he opened his mouth, his expression was blank, he seemed to want to say something, his hands waved helplessly in the air. The groom's appearance suddenly became strange, but the bride Tomoka was still holding his arm and laughing. On her beautiful white face was a smile full of happiness. The priest still kept a serious and solemn expression. The people around were still laughing and talking loudly as usual. Only Siddle saw it. The little girl who had just been beside her suddenly appeared on Ikuta's body. She rode on the man's shoulder, her arms tightly wrapped around his neck. Ikuta's face gradually turned pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The wedding music was still playing. The white doves were flapping their wings. Everyone was laughing and talking happily, blessing the newlyweds. But no one saw a silent murder taking place. Siddle's whole body turned cold. She unconsciously took 2 steps back, intending to leave this strangely atmospheric wedding scene first, but saw the little girl riding on the man suddenly looking at her. The little girl's eye bags were dark, her 2 black eyes took up 2/3 of her face. She turned to face Siddle, her gloomy eyes seemed to be glued to her. Siddle's expression did not change, pretending not to see, quietly intending to leave. Immediately after, there was a loud bang, the man fell to the ground. It seemed that everyone finally realized what was happening. They stopped their endless blessings, anxiously gathering around the groom. The crowd was so crowded that for a moment, Siddle could not squeeze out. When she looked back, she found that the little girl had disappeared. Only the man named Ikuta was lying on the ground with a pale face, his neck twisted at a strange angle. The priest stepped forward and took her pulse. He's dead. The crowd let out screams, some fear, some surprise, some grief. It seemed that the bride Tomoka couldn't accept this result. She collapsed, covered her face, and fell down beside Ikuta, crying miserably. After Siddle finished watching the play, the little girl's figure was no longer visible at the scene. "Don't marry him." Siddle recalled the hateful words that the girl who didn't look like her had said, and silently meditated for a minute. She intended to leave this chaotic place first, then go look for any other clues, but unexpectedly, Siddle had only taken 2 steps when she was stopped by someone. That person said, "Tourist, it's chaotic here, please go back to the hotel and rest first." Siddle wanted to say that she wouldn't leave, but immediately after, the image before her eyes became distorted, and when she opened her eyes, she saw the ceiling of the hotel. Siddle. Damn. This damn nonsense. She was lying on a soft bed, about to sit up when she suddenly saw someone standing right next to her bed. This person turned out to be the bride Tomoka. She was wearing a white wedding dress with a wide skirt, holding a beautiful bouquet of flowers in her hand. Her eyes were dull, her beautiful face had a stiff smile. She stood quietly next to Siddle without making a sound. Seeing that Siddle had woken up, her jet-black eyes suddenly lit up. She looked at Siddle blankly, as if she had discovered something, suddenly gently said, "Great, Ikuta, I finally found you, it turns out you're here." Siddle. The little girl's eyes widened in horror. Before her white silk-gloved hand could touch her, Siddle had continuously retreated, accidentally falling onto the bed. She rubbed her forehead, her whole body hiding behind the bed, only half of her head exposed, hearing Tomoka's gentle and sweet voice, "Let's go, my love, let's continue the wedding ceremony." Even if a demon had just appeared beside her, Siddle was not as frightened as she was now. She carefully stood up, looking at the mature woman who seemed to be planning to marry her, saying softly, I'm not Ikuta." "Huh?" The beautiful bride held the bouquet in her hand, tilted her head in doubt, seemingly not understanding what was going on. "What are you saying, Ikuta? You're kidding me, right?" Tomoka's smile remained unchanged, her expression as if drawn, not changing at all. The woman said with an expectant tone, "Our wedding isn't over yet, come on, let's continue the ceremony." Siddle was silent. She really wanted to say that the person she was marrying was dead. Who knew if the wedding continued, would the demon that had killed Ikuta strangle her to death? Moreover, at first glance, this bride didn't look like a normal person. Siddle didn't respond. She looked at Tomoka who was walking towards her, intending to go around this woman and run out, but when she ran past her, she heard the woman's cold voice with a terrifying sneer, "Ikuta, where are you going?" Siddle's heart was in a panic, suddenly realizing something, but before she could think carefully, the space before her eyes was distorted once again. Siddle opened her eyes and woke up on the soft bed. She turned her head indifferently and saw the beautiful woman in a pure white wedding dress standing beside the bed. Tomoka's face was pale, her smile was stiff, her eyes were dull as she looked at her, her black eyes were flickering. Then the woman's gentle voice rang out again. "Good, Ikuta, I finally found you, so here you are. Let's go, let's continue the wedding ceremony." Siddle, she hated this nonsense. Siddle didn't want to just get married to Tomoka, so she decided to try to fight it out one more time. She sat up, gritting her teeth in her heart, facing Tomoka, lifting her skirt. "Look, sister, we're the same gender, I'm not Ikuta, Tomoka's." Opening her eyes, it was still the familiar scene. Turning around, it was still the familiar plot. "That's great, Ikuta." Siddle interrupted the woman, calmly saying, "I know, let's go now." She indifferently got out of bed, indifferently walked to the woman's side, her mind blank. Who could have thought that? She, Siddle, who had fought against perverts and demons to survive until now, would eventually lose to the plot of a game. At the age of 12, she was forced to marry a bride who was unknown if she was human or a demon. Suddenly becoming a married person, Siddle's mood at this moment was hard to describe. She stayed by Tomoka's side, recalling what the little demon said when it appeared, trying to strike up a conversation with her. "Tomoka, do you remember why you fell in love with me?" Siddle and the bride Tomoka had already reached the hotel door. If she couldn't avoid marrying Tomoka, Siddle wanted to probe for some information first. She had a feeling that this village was much more dangerous than Baruna village. In other words, during the sacrificial ceremony in the village before, if Slender Man hadn't taken the bullet, Siddle could guess what would happen next. Losing the sacrificial doll, the villagers would riot, either tying up the two outsiders, her and Jacqueline, or she would have to help them make another doll. It was just that making a doll would obviously require more than a human skin. From this perspective, Baruna village was actually quite dangerous. But fortunately, a slender man jumped out on the way to help Siddle block the villagers. Again. Siddle had just learned from the previous experience, while listening to Tomoka excitedly talk about the sweet past between her and Ikuta. The bride put her arm around Siddle. She was a little shorter than Siddle, so this position made Siddle's arm touch a cold but soft feeling. "Siddle." She felt unwell, wanting to pull her hand away, but also wanting to continue listening to Tomoka speak. She was afraid that after refusing Tomoka's contact, she would return to that small bed in the hotel. Ikuta and I met at a gaming club. The bride looked at Siddle gently. Did Ikuta forget? Speaking of which, do you remember what you said? He said, he will always love you, respect you, protect you. Siddle already got the key word. Game. When she was about to ask more, she realized that the two of them had already walked a distance, almost reaching the church. Siddle immediately slowed down, while casually talking to Tomoka, she assessed the surroundings. Then she saw a tall and thin figure. Slender Man's tentacles left faint dark traces on the wall. It stood next to the wall, seemingly determining Siddle's direction from afar. It's just, is she seeing things? Why does it feel like Slender Man has lost 2 tentacles? Siddle was a little surprised. When she was running on the small road, she didn't even turn back to look at Slender Man, so only now did she realize that it had lost part of its tentacles. It seemed that the villagers and the water god weren't too useless. Siddle had no intention of going to the church. Seeing Slender Man's figure on the road to the church, not only did she slow down, she also deliberately avoided going towards where it was standing. Then, she received a sudden, harsh interrogation from Tomoka. Ikuta, where are you going? Siddle was startled by the woman's shriek. She wasn't good at handling situations like this, like a man who was caught cheating on his wife. Only daring to mumble, "You're still following me." Although Siddle did intend to run away, she wasn't ready to leave the character of Ikuta and return to the original hotel. After all, she didn't know how many chances she had to return to the plot. She could only take advantage of the way to the church to see if she could find more clues to escape this difficult situation. Slender Man was over there, and it seemed that the bride Tomoka didn't believe what Siddle said. She stared at Siddle with a resentful gaze. Her strength was surprisingly strong. She grabbed Siddle's arm and pulled her towards the church. Ikuta, I will never let you escape. Siddle cried out in panic, wait. There's... Slender Man was still standing there. She struggled, but the woman seemed to not hear anything, resolutely pulling her away. Siddle looked at Slender Man in despair as he got closer and closer. Damn, what's going on? She's clearly resisting, but the plot still hasn't returned from the hotel. Will she be pierced by Slender Man's tentacles later, or torn apart by the bride Tomoka first, or will that little devil rush out and strangle her to death? Siddle was torn between pulling out the crowbar and hoping that Slender Man would fight Tomoka so she could escape, when she suddenly remembered that she still had one more item. The doll with her name written on it. Siddle hesitated for a moment, took out the doll, grabbed Tomoka's other hand, and stuffed the doll into her hand. The bouquet of flowers in Tomoka's hand was suddenly thrown away. A doll was forcefully stuffed in its place. She seemed a little stunned, looked at the doll in her hand, then looked at the person whose hand she was grabbing, Siddle. Her cold, lifeless eyes suddenly revealed hesitation. It seemed like she was hesitating to judge who was the real one. Siddle stole a glance at Tomoka's expression, carefully trying to pull her hand out of the woman's plump chest bit by bit. She succeeded. But before Siddle could be happy, when she turned around, she saw Slender Man right at hand. Using the phrase, right at hand, to describe it wasn't quite accurate. To be exact, it was only Slender Man who was right at hand. Siddle. She silently turned her head away. It was too late to run now. It seemed that Tomoka finally reacted. She looked at the words on the doll, slowly reading each word, L. The beautiful bride looked up in confusion, her cold eyes bloodshot. You're not Ikuta. Your name is Siddle. Thoughts were running wild in Siddle's head. She blinked continuously, not waiting for Tomoka to finish speaking. She quickly took the initiative to grab her cold hand, passionately shouting, Mom.